Hi and welcome to Boston Media Theory. I'm Marcus Breen, and this is a program where we discuss with visitors and residents of Boston various elements and aspects of media communication, both practical and theoretical, and gain a broad perspective. Well, let's say we broaden our perspective. So I'm delighted to welcome someone who we can think of as projecting us into the spiritual world. So we'll have a theological discussion, but also a discussion about issues and matters related to theology with Rabbi Greg Hersh. So welcome, Greg.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here. And you are the first rabbi that I've ever interviewed on Boston Media Theory. So I don't know whether or not that says anything of any significance, but it's great to have you here. And I want to make a couple of comments, of course, because we're going to be talking about Jewishness, Jews, Judaism. And immediately, given that we're in 2026, we know these are immediately controversial categories. Not for everybody, but for some people. And so I should firstly say that nothing that Greg or I say today will be anti-Semitic. And of course, both of us will be making comments that will criticise Jewishness, it will criticise Jews, we will criticise and ponder Judaism, we'll criticise and reflect on Israel and its government, we'll talk about Zionism and Jewish ethno-nationalism as it's practiced in Israel and beyond. But none of that is anti-Semitic, because none of it is based on the definition of anti-Semitism, which is, quote, hostility, prejudice or discrimination directed against Jewish people. So I thought I'd say all that because it's useful not only to clear the air about a lot of imprecision to do with these discussions, but also to recognise that we have a world in which there are many different understandings and appreciations and expressions of Judaism, as there are with many other denominations and religions. But we're living in a difficult time, and certainly a difficult time according to how different beliefs are defined. You're not the first person who I've had conversations with at Boston Media Theory or on Boston Media Theory about Judaism and the challenges of being Jewish. So I want to again thank you for being here, Greg, and thank you for taking the time. Certainly Jill Chaney of Jewish Voice for Peace was here and offered some really quite stunning comments for those of you who'd like to go and look for that interview with Jill about Jewish Voice for Peace and her experience of Judaism. More than welcome. So all that to say, that's a lead into a discussion of your own experience of being what you described to me and what is reasonably well known as your anti-Zionist Judaism. So let's talk about what that means and explain what that is. And let's explore then how this plays out both in, if you like, a religious, theological sense, but also potentially ideological. So what does it mean to be Jewish and not Zionist?
Thank you for the question, and again, it's such an honor to be here with you. Anti-Zionist Judaism is, I guess, a new term that is developing and in formation, because it's in response to this conflation that this prevailing belief that all Jews must be Zionists. And it is certainly how I was raised, that supporting Israel, loving Israel should be a cornerstone of my Jewish identity. And myself, like now hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of other Jewish people, have realized that the indoctrination that they received is not only problematic and doesn't align with other Jewish values, but it actually was never taught. It's a relatively recent phenomenon since 1948 that Jews are told part of our religion is supporting a state. Prior to that, we could always just be patriots for whatever country we lived in and proudly part of that country. And now there's a great emphasis on loving another country in addition to our own. And anti-Zionist Judaism has existed, actually did exist long before the creation of the state, in the form of the Bundists of Poland, in the form of Orthodox Jewry in Eastern Europe and in America, and even Reform Jewry was anti-Zionist in their 1885 Pittsburgh platform, was proud to be American, said, this is our new Jerusalem, this is Zion, we've made it. We don't need to yearn for anywhere else. So these beliefs were actually arguably prevailing only 100 years ago. And through intentional suppression of that history, as well as developments in world history, such as the Holocaust, Jewish feelings around that country have shifted in the 20th century, and we're now seeing a shift back to these historic Jewish paradigms that appreciate just being where we are, appreciating that Judaism has always been a diasporic religion for over 2,000 years, and we can embrace living right where we are. We don't need to yearn to live anywhere else.
Well, that's a beautiful statement. Thank you, Greg. I had not really considered that notion of, being Jewish and happily wherever you are, as it were, as opposed to this idea of somewhere you have to go somewhere, namely to Palestine.
It's actually a concept that the Bundists developed. The Bundists were a socialist group. Molly Crabapple has recently written a book on the Bundists. And I'm no historian, but they developed this concept of doikite, here-ness, as a central value and core tenet of what it means to be a Bundist, that we appreciate where we are, and it's our duty as Jews to make this the best possible home, not just for Jewish people, but for all of our citizenry in Poland or in whatever country we find ourselves. It was a message of solidarity and togetherness, and we're here and we're in this with the rest of the community. And again, this is something that the Jewish community, that anti-Zionist Jews today are really reclaiming, this attitude of solidarity with those around us, and that we as Jews can help lift each other up, and we can also help lift other minorities and other communities along with ourselves.
Right, so it's a very generous notion of shared humanity, really. It seems to me that's a way that I can interpret it.
That's what socialism preaches.
Right, absolutely. And there's a fine tradition of that progressive approach to other human beings. Not only socialists, but certainly major thinkers, probably the most well known is Marx, Karl Marx, as the one of the great progenitors of communism, but certainly the idea of the fact that human beings should flourish, regardless of who they are and wherever they are.
Right. Something
that's pretty well lost on a lot of people. What kind of Judaism do you then express, as it were, as I think you mentioned to me before we started this interview, in your denomination? So it finds what you think of and how you think of yourself as an anti-Zionist then finds expression in a denomination, right? In a group. So can you explain that for us?
Yes. There are several Jewish denominations, and then, of course, subdivisions within each of those. The major categories in America are Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, and I'm actually a Reconstructionist Jew. We represent about 2% of American Jewry, and all of these share in common love of Torah, love of Jewish traditions, Jewish history, Jewish culture, and what differentiates the denominations is where their focus lies on, or how strictly they observe the letter of the law. And so anti-Zionist Jewry, actually, we've created a diasporic denomination. On May 18th, 2026, just a few months ago, the Jewish diaspora movement was launched, and I'm proud to be a part of it, and the V'ahavta community shares in this pride. And this Jewish diaspora movement is helping Judaism evolve and meet this moment. the power of denominations, I mean, they've existed for only about 200 years, actually. Reform was the first split off from Orthodoxy. And it's just the sense of power in numbers, that we're not doing this ourselves, and it's nice to know, to be in communication, and to support all the other communities around America or around the globe that are engaged in similar theologies and similar work.
Great. And of course, there are also people, and this is my own experience, who may be Jewish, but it's a sort of an ethnicity. So there's no real association with the denomination. How does that work?
Yes.
Is it just...
Actually, that represents the majority of Jews in America today.
Oh.
Over 50% of Jews are not affiliated with a synagogue today, and so they express their Jewish identity in different ways. For many Jews, like my own parents, watching Seinfeld, eating bagels and lox, these are expressions of a Jewish identity. And for my parents and for many Jewish people, supporting the state of Israel is how they express their Jewish identity, if in addition to or instead of going and worshiping and being part of a synagogue, a spiritual community.
I didn't appreciate that you could be not religious and still an avid Zionist.
Oh yes. Judaism is unique in this sense that even if a Jew becomes this is actually my own story. At age 15, I became an atheist, and I rejected the notion of Jewish chosenness, that we were different or special in some way. And so I actually thought, as a 15-year-old, I couldn't be Jewish anymore because I don't hold these core beliefs of traditional Judaism. And what makes Judaism unique is that it's a people as well as a religion. And so people have all kinds of beliefs, and those beliefs change through life as we all grow and evolve and have different ideas about how the world works. And so Judaism, or the Jewish people, persists almost independently of the religion. There are lots of people who identify as Jews, love their Jewish identity, and that's considered a valid expression of Judaism without going to synagogue. Unlike in other religions where, having some sort of relationship to your place of worship is what defines your religion. Like and this is another interesting aspect of Judaism, is that people who leave the religion, they say, I'm done with Judaism, I want to be a Buddhist. Then they become Jew-boos. Like there's even a name for that. Because there's something about Jewish identity that persists, that is deeply ingrained, and that we take pride in. And so whether or not we have the bona fides of synagogue membership, everyone is still considered Jewish. And there's even people who make the joke, I'm Jew-ish.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm familiar with this partly from the experience that I have of being Irish, or my Irishness is something that is variously claimed. Now, it has none of the baggage of religion associated with it. There are people who describe themselves as Irish Catholic, which is another thing again where the two have been articulated, right, in an attempt to say there's a particular social and religious formation that goes together. Well, coming from a Protestant tradition, that doesn't work for me, but still, it's fascinating to see the way that religion is mobilised, or can be not mobilised, and still give us what we need, if you like, in terms of those deep human qualities of, I'm reluctant to say identity, but of belonging, which I think is a beautiful notion. I remember when the arguments against DEI started emerging, and many institutions of higher learning were told that this was wrong, that they couldn't do it, and the Trump administration persists with this. One of the solutions that I noted came up at Boston University, where I know some people, was that, and also at Harvard actually, was to talk about belonging. And I thought it was a terrific solution to the question of, well, you won't allow us to legally talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, but we will seriously talk about the fact that human beings want to belong. Yeah.
Actually, you took words out of my mouth. The founder of Reconstructionist Judaism, Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, came up with, or maybe it pre-existed him, the 3 B's of all religions: belonging, behaving, and believing. And most religions, you believe in something, you believe that Jesus is God, and so you belong to a Christian community, and your behaviors, you celebrate Christmas, and it flows from belief. And in Jewish life, according to Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, belonging is what's primary, that our beliefs change and evolve as we go through life, and our behaviors reinforce our Jewish identity, but it's belonging that is what people are looking for.
Absolutely. Well, that's a really valuable insight, and I'm glad you explained that in terms of the formal kind of appreciation of that sense of being a person of a particular community, which of course is another very strong notion.
And I'll just, to take it back to Ve'ahavta, this is a very important concept. So many Jewish people have felt alienation and isolation over the last 3 years, as those who believe in peace and justice and equality and liberty for all have been sidelined by the Jewish community. There are very few institutions like Ve'ahavta to represent us, and so it led to many arguments with family members, with friends, leaving institutions, and anti-Zionist Jews are feeling a sense of isolation, and therefore belonging really is at the cornerstone of what we do at Ve'ahavta, giving people a place to congregate because they don't feel comfortable anywhere else. And it almost doesn't matter what we do in that space because it's so spiritually meaningful for people just to know that they're not alone in their beliefs, that there's other Jewish people who share their values. It's impossible to minimize the power of belonging.
No, I would have to agree with you 100%. And as I said earlier, it's such a fundamental element of being human, to be with other human beings. And of course, the great insights, not only of socialism, but other progressive movements has been the fact that what we can spend our time doing is in fact enhancing social relations, because that's what really matters, right? I wanted to turn, if you don't mind, in this conversation both about Judaism, Zionism, to the big other, if you like, which is the big I, the Israel story question, and how to make sense, if you like, of Israel as a incredibly influential and powerful force, not only in the global imaginary, and you talked about the diaspora, and I think that's very important. Many of us are members of a diaspora, me of an Australian diaspora, an Irish diaspora, and so on, but also just how that imaginary then has been orchestrated to create perhaps a greater sense of importance and potentially domination over US foreign policy. I know I have a lot to unpack there, but where, if you like, for us humble folk here at Boston Media Theory, where could we start with a conversation about Israel?
Well, it's a great question. Many of us have received a kind of education about Israel subliminally, or through movies like Exodus, through our media's support. When we watch the news about what's going on, we always hear from Israelis. And so Americans, I think, have a bias to support Israel. They also look like us. They come from Europe, largely, and claim to be a democracy, which we also claim to be here in America. And so there are these points of connection that Americans feel a special kinship with this. And then you add on the religious elements. Jews feel, as I mentioned, a sense of we need to support this country because It's how we were raised, or how my generation was raised. And Christians too, evangelical and religious Christians, agree that Jews are the chosen people and that we will eventually return to that holy land. And so there's religious support for Israel as well. And so over the last 3 years, a lot of people have had to unpack all of that subliminal education, or we might call it propaganda, that they have received over their lifetimes. And what has cut through it, for me, and for many people, is social media. I mean, TikTok had an enormous impact on how Americans and how Jewish Americans perceive what's going on in Israel, because we got to see firsthand what was going on in Gaza. It was not mediated through a media person explaining that this is actually self-defense. We got to see atrocious war crimes with our own eyes. And then it led to asking questions. How is this possible? How am I supporting this? And so many Americans today are on this pathway of decolonizing their minds, of learning that Palestinians, Muslims, are actually equal human beings just like us, who yearn maybe even for democracy just like us, who yearn, so people are going through a process of unlearning. And for Jewish people, that can be very painful, because it reveals that many of our Jewish leaders and the people who educated us were not telling the whole story.
No, really. And I think your use of the word propaganda is probably pretty apposite here, that there has been a single narrative over and over again, and it's been very difficult to find a way out of that narrative. I was raised in an evangelical Protestant family, and we were always of the view, unquestioningly, that the Jewish people were God's chosen people, and it was repeated over and over. And I don't think anybody's chosen by God anyway. But that narrative became dominant, and there was always a kind of deferential notion, certainly in my family and in the evangelical community. And now we know it's been weaponized.
Correct.
In quite unhealthy ways. What within the life of your community and of your congregation, is there a sense in which you sort of struggle to separate yourself from Israel and mentions of Israel, or is it just something you say, well, it doesn't really matter?
We are an explicitly Judaism beyond Zionism community, and so Israel is a part of what we do. Palestine is a part of what we do. We do engage with it. This actually was a question. Via Hafta is 1 year old. Right. So this past year, we've been figuring out our self-identity. And this was a real question. Are we a group of Jews doing Judaism? A group of radical Jews who feel alienated from every other Jewish community, simply doing Judaism, doing the prayers that would look a lot like any synagogue? Or are we doing something truly unique and special in the Jewish world, where we get to bring our values into our liturgy? And the direction that Via Hafta seems to be heading in is values-aligned liturgy. So when we encounter the word Yisrael, Israel, in our prayer book, which we don't omit, but we translate it as God wrestlers, which is actually a more literal translation. It harkens back to the story of Jacob, who gets the name Israel because he wrestled with God and man and prevailed and survived. So that's the derivation of the word.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that is amazing. That is amazing to think that one could replace one word with a descriptor like that, which is, having read the Bible many times in my youth, I understand where that's coming from, and it's a wonderful alternative.
And it's a way of maintaining our values as we pray. It's important that we be able to pour our hearts into our prayers. And so another change that we've made this past year is in our morning prayer. The traditional Jewish mourner's Kaddish offers wishes for peace for all Jewish people on earth. And we've expanded that. We wish for peace for all Jewish people on earth, Kol Yisrael, Ve'kol Yoshvei Tevel, and for all who dwell on earth. And we specifically name Ve'al Kol Palestinai. For every Palestinian, we wish for peace, because that is our sincere wish.
Right. Well, we can only hope that peace, there will be an outbreak of peace, can't we? And we can only hope that it starts with us, but it also starts with the leadership across the world. I'm wondering whether or not there's anything in terms of, a final statement with the last minute or two we've got here, a final statement you'd like to make about what is unique, your own unique characteristics in this situation, or in the current world we live in.
Me personally, or Ve'ahavta?
Either or.
I have been dismayed, frankly, that there are so few rabbis engaged in this kind of work. In order to start Ve'ahavta, I had to leave my congregation of 9 years and sacrifice a very nice contract to start something from scratch. And I was at a unique position in life, where I don't have any children right now, and so I was able to make this shift. But so there are reasons why other rabbis, financial reasons sometimes, but even ideological. It saddens me that there aren't more communities, more rabbis helping Jewish people who are feeling so abandoned right now by their religion. I will say, I did give up a very cushy contract. I used to have July and August off every year, and now I work 80 hours a week all summer. But it is absolutely holy work. I can't imagine doing anything else. And this is what's needed in the Jewish world right now. There's such a void, It's an opportunity for people to come together, or even to replace the idea of rabbis, because we seem to have we're not meeting this moment, and it's time to galvanize.
Okay. Well, on that note, thank you, Greg. Greg Hersh from right here in Cambridge, no less, right? And that's it from me and from us on Boston Media Theory. Until next time, keep on metering, and I look forward to seeing you then. Bye.
Thank you so much, Marcus.
You're welcome.
Are you okay? I don't know, I guess. I appreciate you listening.